Hello, this is Tiffany Bryant, and my presentation is on the wage theft in America. Wage theft is a crime that has been going on in our country since the beginning of our nation, and one can argue that the United States government has failed to thoroughly address this problem. In this paper, one will have a discussion about how the historical existence of wage theft, as well as how the historical values of Protestant work ethic and social Darwinism has influenced the extent to which America has treated wage theft. There will also be a discussion on the social policies that have been put into place to address wage theft and some suggestions that social workers can do to promote justice in this topic. Before going into the history of wage theft, there will first be a discussion on what it is. Wage theft is when an employer unlawfully withholds wages and or benefits to an employee. Wage theft does not have any boundaries and can affect any socioeconomic, race, or status due to the sneaky ways that an employer can steal wages, such as minimum wage violations, being denied overtime payment, and or their final paycheck, employees having to work off the clock, and tips being denied by employers. Payroll fraud also occurs, which is when employers fraudulently classify employees as independent contractors in order to avoid paying overtime and minimum wage. With the knowledge of how wages can be stolen, one should further understand the enormity of this issue. According to thinkprogressive.org, in an article titled "The Biggest Robbers in America Are Employers," it was found that in 2012, the theft of wages extremely surpassed other types of thefts, including individuals being mugged, as well as bank, home, and store robberies combined. To be even more specific, the recovery of back wages paid to victims totaled 933 million compared to only 350 million for the other forms of theft previously mentioned. To most people, this statistic is very alarming, and the question that arises is how wage theft can become such a huge issue. One reason that can be concluded is because many of the victims are not aware of their rights and do not know that they are being taken advantage of, or they may be so oppressed that they may feel that they can't do anything about it or fear what the retaliation would be. It should be noted that although wage theft can affect anyone, there are certain populations that are more heavily hit. According to Broken Laws, Unprotected Workers, it affects 63% of Latinos, 13.5% of blacks, 17.1% of Asians, and 6.3% of whites. Also, when it comes to citizenship, 30% of 30% are United States citizens, 31.2% are United States citizens but come from another country, and 38% are from another country and entered into the United States illegally. It is noticeably evident that wage theft majorly affects minorities and immigrants in today's society, and the same can be said throughout history. One of the earliest occurrences of wage theft can be found in 1638, where Anthony Portuguese sued a white merchant for owed wages and won. A year later, Manuel de Rus successfully sued Europeans for wages due, and there are many other scenarios similar to this. It should be noted that most individuals are unaware that when African Americans were shipped over to America, they were viewed more as indentured servants, therefore having more rights to negotiate their wages as well as their freedom. However, once slavery started to become more legal among the different colonies, these rights were stripped away from them and they were subjected to forced labor. Although these occurrences of wage theft predates the historical values of the Protestant work ethic and social Darwinism, They further perpetuated the justification of stealing or even denying wages to slaves. The Protestant work ethic adhered to the concept of predestination, which categorized people as either saved or going to hell. During, Due to this notion, settlers categorized them as going to hell, which demoted them from human beings to property, causing settlers to use them as a means to reach their wealth, success, and where they were predestined to be. Ultimately, the success and wealth of the settlers derived from the hard work of slaves. According to Joe R. Fegan, indeed, from the late 1600s to the 1800s, the majority of major agricultural exports in the Western dominated world trade were produced by enslaved Africans. Without this intensive labor, it seems unlikely that there would have been a successful British and United States textile industry, which depended heavily on slave produced cotton. To further examine the amount that would be owed to slaves from their forced labor, that would amount to over trillions of dollars in today's market. The concept of social Darwinism also justified the notion of using slaves as property instead of human beings because of their inability to fit and adjust to their society and the need for white settlers to govern over them. It is because of the concept of Protestant work ethic and social Darwinism that freedom, upward mobility, self-reliance, and equal opportunity was denied to slaves, which have continued to be an issue to this day. The government has responded to the issues of wage theft by implementing several policies and programs. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which was part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, was implemented for workers to be paid minimum wage dollar amounts, and for individuals to be paid time and a half if they worked over 40 hours per week. Also around this time, the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division was created to enforce companies and or employers to adhere to minimum wage requirements as well as overtime compensation. Although the implementation of this policy began to protect some individuals, it still denied protection to minorities that were most oppressed. According to Susan Melluser, in order for the bill to get passed, Franklin D. Roosevelt had to compromise with the Democrats from the South. This compromise allowed the bill to be passed, but excluded farm workers from this bill due to Southerners' fear that by allowing blacks to get the same amount of wages as their white peers, employers would not hire them, causing them to be unemployed and dependent upon the state. With all that considered, the implementation of this piece of legislation was flawed from its inception and desperately needs to be revamped. Other legislation that recently has been in the news is the Payroll Fraud Act and the Wage Theft Protection Act. The Payroll Fraud Act, which has only been introduced into the Senate and would also amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1983, had the purpose of identifying individuals as employees or non-employees and informing them of their wages as well as their rights. It would also make it illegal for employers to retaliate against employees that decided to file a complaint. The Wage Theft Prevention Act requires employers to provide their employees with specific wage information such as their hourly pay or salary, overtime rate, as well as the business's legal name, address, phone number, and their worker compensation information. It should be noted that the passage of this bill is done on a state level, and there are currently 16 states that have implemented this into their legislation. Although the government has recent plans to rectify the long history of wage theft, more needs to be done to ensure that the theft of wages is eliminated. The social policy approach that is needed for social workers to fulfill the mission of social justice in regards to wage theft would be to implement the following strategies. First, it would be important for the government to increase the allotment of funds to the Department of Labor in order to increase staff and the resources needed to fully operate and be able to fully persecute companies and or employers that steal wages from their employers that steal wages from their employees. Secondly, it will be important for those that are involved with stealing of wages of their employees to be criminally charged for their actions. By doing this, it will cause companies and employers to think twice before committing wage theft on their employees. Lastly, it will be important for the social workers to educate and raise awareness of wage theft to employees as well as employers. Educated employees will allow them to know what their rights are and to become empowered to report that company or employer. And by educating employers, they will be able to understand the ramifications of wage theft and empower them to report a supervisor or another company that has these illegal practices. So that is my presentation, and thank you for listening. What I will leave you with is this next slide. It is from the Council of Chicago, and this is their way of raising awareness in their city. And they had, along with a lot of information, this is the wage theft game. So, if you would like to play it and see what your chances are in this issue, please do. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye.